Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversational Witchcraft with me, Dawn the Kitchen Witch. This is your daily reminder or weekly reminder, however often you listen to this, to make sure that you subscribe to this channel. Make sure you like and share and hit all the buttons and follow whatever platform you're listening on or watching on. Like and subscribe. And remember that you can now support us. You can support me making this podcast for you by clicking the support us link and help me bring you more great information and inspiration and magic and conversations and all the good stuff that you love. And don't forget, you can visit me and learn more about food magic and kitchen witchcraft at cucinaAurora.com. You can buy my books there. You can peruse my products. You can look at all my kitchen witchy recipes and follow me on social media at Cucina Aurora. And that's about it. And now we're going to jump into it. Okay, today's guest, very awesome. We have Asa West, the author of The Witch's Kin and Five Principles of Green Witchcraft. And her work has appeared in The Offing Joyland, Gods&Radicals, The Mary Sue, Reactor Magazine, and other outlets. She holds an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and works as a journalist under her name, Julia Glassman. She covers everything from Marvel movies to folk horror and, of course, all things witchy. I think we're going to be new best friends. Asa, I am so excited to have you. I was
Oh, thank you
reading,
so much.
you're so welcome. I was reading your bio and I was like, oh, she's into Marvel movies and pop culture witches. Like, we're going to be the bestest best friends. Now, you are, according to your bio, you're out in California.
Yes, I am.
And as the time of we're recording this in January, just want to check in with you. Make obviously you're okay because you look like you're home with your cat. Right
Yeah.
now, all those fires are raging. Are you safe?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. Yeah, so my family and I are safe. But it's hard to watch all of the devastation that's going on around us, you know. I mean, it's every night when the sun sets and like we're still safe, I'm just reminded of all the people who are not safe, right? But thank you for checking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little crazy. I do my best not to like deep dive into too much of the horrible news, right? Like I like to know what's happening in the world. I like to help where I can, but I admittedly cannot look at the images of what's happening there. I survived a house fire,
Oh my
so
gosh.
I have a real hard time looking at it, but it's got to be terrifying for you and your family and your loved ones. And so we all wish you well and make sure that you're staying safe and you know, community. We've got to protect each other and care for each other. So, as long as you're doing okay.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Of
Yeah.
course, of course. And you've lived out in California your whole life, right? I mean, according to your bio, you grew up
Yeah.
out on the West Coast. So I'm an East Coast Italian New Yorker, right? So I part of your bio you said like, oh, you grew up in like suburbia and it was very conservative. And then you were like fascinated by the wilds of things that were like in
Right.
between the spaces, right? In between the manicured spaces. So I'm really interested in learning about how you, as a kid in that environment,
Mhm.
found witchcraft.
Yeah. Well, so what's funny, like I always hear witches when they talk about their upbringing and their childhood. I feel like witches are always saying like, "Oh, well, I grew up in like a tiny village, you know, in the wild." Like, oh, I was listening to Mara Sterling's interview on one of your previous
Yeah.
episodes. It said, "Oh, I grew up in a cliffside village by the sea, you know." Right? Just surrounded by the fairies and the wilderness. And I am so jealous of all those witches because that was not my upbringing at all, you
Yeah.
know. Um, yeah, so I was born in Los Angeles, and I grew up in Orange County, California, which I hear it's changed a little bit. I haven't been back there in a while. But when I was growing up, it was very, very manicured, right?
Mm.
Like just take your stereotypical image of a suburb, and that was it, right? Lawns everywhere, strip malls, concrete, pavement, asphalt, everything was sterile, everything was manicured, everything was just really tightly controlled. Both in terms of like the ecology, right? Like the plants that were allowed to
Mm,
grow there, the wildlife that was not allowed to be there. And the culture too, right? It was like heavily like right-wing, conservative, Christian, evangelical. It was very, very conformist.
yeah.
Um, but what's fascinating about any place like that, where like people are so tightly focused on control, is that you get the weeds growing, right? So I remember sometimes, occasionally, there would just be a coyote trotting down the sidewalk, you know?
Yes.
Like cars would slow down and like look at it,
Yeah.
people would say like, "Oh my God, there's a coyote,"
Yeah.
because they're part of that landscape, right? Like they're not going anywhere,
Right. You're
even
in their house. We're in
yeah,
their house.
exactly. Exactly. We're on their turf,
Yeah.
Of course they're there. Um, and culturally, there would just be these outlets that if you knew where to look, you could find them. And so when I remember when I was growing up, I always had this feeling of like it was like wearing a sweater that was too small. I always
Mm,
felt like there's something wrong here. Like there's something
mhm.
I need to get free somehow, but I don't know how. I don't know what I'm looking for. And then I remember one day in high school, a friend of mine, she was like looking through a catalog with jewelry and stuff in it. And I said, "Oh, what's that?" Because I saw some like kind of cool looking stuff in it. And she said, "Oh, well, it's a catalog for witches. I'm a witch." This is like back in the 90s,
It had to
I was
be
like,
the
"14
Pyramid
year
Collection. Do you remember
It
that magazine,
probably
The
was.
Pyramid Collection?
I Googled it like a few months ago, like what was that catalog? And I think
Yes.
it's right. Yeah,
Yes.
like velvet dresses and silver
Yes.
jewelry, right?
Yes. Like a
Um,
little crappy ass singing bowl and like
yeah,
chakra
it's
earrings
like
that weren't really chakra earrings. Like,
right, like
yes.
just
Yes.
tchotchkes.
Yes. I loved it so much. And it got delivered once a month.
Yeah. Yes. So I
Yes.
think it was that same one,
Yeah.
and like you're kind of confirming it for me since you also heard of
Yes,
it.
for sure. For sure.
Right. So she was looking through this catalog and she said she was a witch. And the only thing I had ever heard about witches was that, like, oh, they worship Satan. It was like that 90s
Yeah.
idea of like they're sacrificing animals in the graveyards. And so I kind of like clutched my pearls. I was like, "You're a what? What?" And I remember she said, like, "No, no, 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 it's not what you think. Like, we worship nature."
Yeah.
And that's the way a 14-year-old would describe it, right? Like that she was also kind of on her kind of like exploration journey of like what she wanted to be in life. And that was her understanding of it. And it just made such sense to me. And I felt like, it almost felt like it kind of unlocked this like ancestral memory for me of like, oh yeah, witches worship nature. I had never heard that before, but like it felt like a memory of it.
Right.
You
Like it just made sense.
It just made sense, right?
Right.
Or maybe there was like something I had heard as a kid and I'd forgotten about. I don't know, who knows, but it just made sense to me that the way she described it. And so I kind of mulled over that for a little while. I was like, wow, they worship nature. It's a witch. Can I be a witch?
Is that
And
me?
uh, and meanwhile, there was this tiny little bookstore near where I lived. This was before like Barnes and Noble and Borders and like the
Yep.
huge, definitely before Amazon, right? So like the back when the only bookstores I knew about were like these tiny little ones. And so there was a little indie bookshop near my home. It mainly sold textbooks for the local college, but it also sold just normal books too. They were making their money however they could.
Yeah.
And I remember I pulled out this book from one of their bookshelves one day. It was called, I think, The Practice of Witchcraft Today by Robin Skelton, I want to say. It had this kind of like 16th century, like astrological illustration on the cover. It looked so like deliciously occult.
Yeah.
Um, and I procured a copy of it for myself. My mom was not thrilled about this, but she allowed it. And that's how I started learning, right? Was through these just little
Yeah.
interstitials, right? Like the coyote on the road, The vacant lot with strange plants growing in it that
Mm.
weren't allowed to be there, but they were still there, things like thistle and dandelion and in cool stuff that I didn't have the words for. And then just one little book on a bookshelf, right? That I happened to find.
I think that
Books
I
that,
don't think that's its coincidence at all. Like I don't and it's interesting to hear you talk about it because my upbringing was very similar, right?
Mhm.
I grew up in the suburbs of New York. I was out on Long Island, like the the
Yeah.
the birthplace of Levittown and suburbia and like that sort of manufactured home and those I mean you live in California, so you probably know what a sod farm is. Do you know what a sod farm is?
Maybe.
So like yeah, on Long Island, all the lawns are sod, like the type of
Okay,
grass, all the
right.
type of grass that you have on golf courses. And
Right.
out
So the
on
kind like it comes rolled up and you
it comes
roll it
rolled up
up.
like a carpet and then you
Yes.
unroll it. And that's the kind of world that I grew up in. And I remember just recently trying to explain to somebody what sod was and
Yes.
that's the type of manufactured living we grew up in. And she was like, I've never heard of such a thing because
Gosh.
she grew up here in New Hampshire.
So I have a story about sod. When I was a kid, I was like, this is what I did for fun when I was a kid. I was digging a hole in our
Yeah,
backyard.
yeah.
Not in we didn't have a sandbox. I was just digging a hole. And about 2 inches down, I came across like plastic netting. And like I pulled it up and like a chunk of sod came off. And I thought, oh my, what on earth? Like there's netting under our entire yard, you know? And it just
Yeah.
really hammered home like this whole place is artificial, Like what was this place like before people came in and, mowed it all down and then built something on top of it, right?
Yeah,
I remember so clearly.
I think that's part of the appeal, or at least for me, was the draw of paganism, the pagan path and
Mhm.
witchcraft, was that, when you're brought up in a certain way, you're brought up in a certain environment
Mhm.
that is very contrived. You have to fit into this box. Everything has to look the same, act the same, think the same, be the same. There's no room for questioning or
Right.
error or difference. And
Mhm.
that appeal of witchcraft or paganism
Mhm.
was you can kind of make it what you want. You can kind of be whoever you want to be. You can dress in the flowy clothes and wear all the rings and grow your
Mhm.
hair long and be barefoot outside digging a hole.
Right. You
And
could be feral,
you could be
like you could be
feral
feral and wild.
to be real, to be not manufactured. And especially growing up in a place like California, specifically in LA, there's a
Mhm.
lot of fake. There's a lot of manicured
Yeah.
humans and spaces, and like this is the ideal. And if you don't fit into this box, then you don't belong.
Yeah.
Period.
I mean,
Was
I will say in LA, there's like way more room for weirdness than there was in Orange County.
yeah,
Like, we have
really.
something, like I said, I don't think it's as big a deal these days, but it was
Mhm.
definitely a thing when I was growing up. We had what we called the orange curtain, which was where you're driving on the 5 freeway from LA to Orange County, and you cross the orange curtain, and the culture completely changes, right? It's
Wow.
all conformist and like right wing, Whereas in LA, I mean, yeah, there's the manufactured stuff, right? I mean, there's Hollywood, the palm trees, we know. But there's also pockets of weirdness, right? There's the we have a long history of like alternative religious movements that have kind of sprouted up.
Mm.
Some of them healthier than others, right? But definitely, there's weirdness here.
So it makes sense to me that when you are put in this box that you are not comfortable with, growing up in that box that you are not comfortable with, the things that are weird, and this is my experience, maybe it was the same for you, the things that were
Uh-huh.
weird or that stood out, like I'm going to go to pop culture and movies and music and
Yeah.
television and books. Those outliers, the witches, were the characters that we
Mhm.
identified with. I was not pretty enough, blonde enough, thin enough to identify with the princesses.
Right.
you know? And I love my Disney movies, but I wasn't Cinderella,
Hmm.
I wasn't Ariel the Little Mermaid. I was Ursula. If I could only
Sure, yeah.
right, like if I could, oh, if I was going to pretend to be one of the characters, I'd be like, well, I look the most like her and I act the most like her, and you know, I guess that would be me. Did you have a similar experience in seeing pop culture and TV and movies?
It's so interesting because I didn't identify with the Disney princesses either, you know? Like I think I probably pretended to be like Ariel, you know, like occasionally, you know. Um, but it's funny, like when I was a kid, all of the characters I like really identified with were like actually like the boy characters, you know?
Yeah.
Like so much so that like when I grew up, I thought like, oh, well, could I be trans? Am I genderqueer? And then I finally decided, no, it's just that the boys were just way more interesting characters than the
So
girls, you
much
know?
cooler. I wanted to be a
Right?
Ghostbuster.
Ghostbusters. I
Right,
loved Link from Legend of Zelda, you know.
right.
He gets to run around with his bow and arrow and his like little green tunic, you know. That was
Yeah.
the life that I wanted.
Yeah.
Um, I bet like I'm just thinking about Zelda now. Like in the newer Zelda games, like the princess is a much more interesting character than
Yeah.
she used to be. So I wonder if things would have been different for me if like, you know, today's Zelda had been around in the 90s, you know. Like
Yeah.
Zelda now is like a scientist and stuff, right? Like,
Yeah. I think about
yeah.
that stuff all the time. Like, I really wanted to be a Ghostbuster, and
Yeah.
I really wanted to be a Ninja Turtle. Like
Uh-huh.
I was so like, oh, these characters, they kick so much butt. And I can remember like
Yeah.
being with my boy cousins and going, well, we're gonna play Ghostbusters. And I'm going, well, you can't be a Ghostbuster, you're a girl. Girls aren't Ghostbusters. Right. And I was like, well,
Unacceptable.
you could be the secretary. The secretary's a girl. And I'm like, well, that's not fun.
Oh, that's
But then,
heartbreaking.
right. But then you watch these things now that are maybe even being remade, right?
Mhm.
And you think, wow, if there had been this when and I'm you're a pretty kick-ass person. I'm a pretty kick-ass person. We've done a lot with our lives as women and writers
Uh-huh.
and witches. Can you imagine if you had had that example? Like I
Right.
remember seeing Pocahontas was my favorite. I know it's not culturally appropriate, but as a little kid, she was a warrior and she chose duty and responsibility over a boyfriend. So that
Mhm.
resonated with me. And then the
Sure.
same thing
Yeah.
with Mulan, she resonated with me because she was a warrior and she chose to be who she was
Hmm.
over having a boyfriend, right? These aren't witchy conversations, but you get where I'm going with that. Had we and I was a little older when I saw those, but had I
Yeah.
had those characters when I was young, when I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old,
Hmm.
how would that have changed instead of me going, I identify with the witches?
I know. Right. I know. Yeah. No, I feel so happy for my daughters because they have more characters like that, you know,
Yeah.
nowadays. I mean, like now, like they're growing up in a world that has, you know, the all-female Ghostbusters movie,
Right?
you know, which
Right?
like they can watch that whenever they want. They don't watch it as much as I want them to because I love that movie. But you know, yeah, I feel like there are more options these days.
Mm,
But then, of course, those are the exact options that are constantly under attack, right? I mean,
yes.
with you know the Trump administration coming in, you know, I mean, it's full out war against anything that's queer, anything that empowers women, anything that blurs these gender lines, right?
Anything
Uh,
that's different, if you're othered, if you're
yeah.
not, if you're not on that bandwagon,
Hmm.
then
Yeah.
you're the enemy,
Right.
right? Like I'm not out to get anybody. I just don't want to be like you. I just want to
Right.
be like me. That doesn't
And
make
that's
me the
not
enemy.
acceptable to them. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
So getting back to like you finding witchcraft, because we could talk about, we're going to go on these tangents,
Right.
right? Was there one or two of these influences around the same time as you were finding this book? And I think that's a great thing to touch on as well. When we were going through this in the
Hmm.
80s and 90s, we couldn't Google search witchcraft. We
I
couldn't look on
know.
TikTok. It was you happen to stumble upon something
Yeah.
that finds you,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Were there characters or moments or any type of fiction that spoke to you. And again, just like that friend said, I'm a witch. You went, oh, that's maybe that could be me. That you
Right.
saw in media that went, oh, wait, I identify with that person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like it's good to remember that nothing we do is ever in a vacuum, right? There are always these bigger cultural forces at work, right?
Right.
So the book that I found in the bookshelf was placed there by a bookseller who got it for the bookstore in the hopes that someone would find it, right? So there were always interconnected.
Mm,
And so around the time when, I found this book that the bookseller thought might sell, and my friend got this catalog that was, being printed, this little movie called The Craft came
mm,
out.
mm.
And that movie changed my life. Like it changed my life, right? The Craft, these four girls are at this um I guess in the movie it's a Catholic school, right? So they're in this very conformist environment. Happens to be Los Angeles, right? So there's an extra layer of resonance for me. Um, and they discover witchcraft, right? In the same way that, in almost the same way that I had. They just happen to know of this little shop down the street run by a witch. You walk in, you don't know anything about it, she'll hook you up, right? She'll
Right.
give you the books you need, she'll give you the supplies you need, right? And of course the movie, it's a horror movie, it's got all the supernatural stuff in it. It's got kind of a problematic message about female companionship, right? Like, oh, if girls get too close to each other, then disaster happens, right?
Mm-hmm. And their
But
combined power and how that can affect other people. And,
right,
and that too much power in a woman can be so dangerous and all of those sort of things.
right, yeah, like the message of the movie is kind of messed up.
But we still
And
wanted to be those girls.
but we still want it to
Oh,
be that. Like the crumbs were there,
yes.
like I've heard like, other queer people talk about just how desperate you get for representation in media, like you start looking for yourself anywhere you can find it, even if it's in something that's like not, that's not great, right? That's like stereotypical or that is not kind, you still seek it out because you're hungry for it.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt about the craft, as I was like learning about this stuff. Um, even with the kind of problematic aspects of the movie, like I was just so hungry for it. I gobbled it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think your story is really so similar. And I love
Hmm.
having these conversations because so many of us on this witchy path have such similar journeys of finding a path of belonging
Hmm.
through things like media representation,
Yes.
little bookstores that helped us along the way, that feeling of not being comfortable, of not fitting in our homes or neighborhoods or churches.
Yeah.
And it's my hope that people are listening to this and go, oh, wait, look at all these people feel the same way I do and found that path that works for them, right?
Yeah.
Which is amazing. So we should probably take a quick break,
Okay.
because we have a lot of ground to cover, and I want to get talking about your new book, Witch Blood Rising, and I don't want to be interrupted by commercials. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll get right back with Asa. No, I said it wrong.
Awesome. Awesome.
Asa, as in awesome, awesome,
There
Asa.
you go.
Okay,
Yes.
we'll be right back. We are back with Asa West. Awesome Asa. That's what I'm calling you from now on. And we're just having the greatest time talking about, the journey of a young witch in the 1990s, which is really what it is. I mean, I could probably list like the 10 movies that influenced me, that are like the 10 movies that influenced you, right? Like Labyrinth, Willow, Legend, Princess Bride,
Yep.
all these, right? All these great like fantasy movies that kind of took us elsewhere and brought us into mysticism and made us go,
Mhm.
I wonder if there's something else besides my little uh Stepford family.
One I would add is The Last Unicorn. That's an important one to add.
Oh my. You know, that movie scared the crap out of me when I was a baby.
Really? The bull? Was it the
The
Red Bull?
bull, the red bull.
Terrifying. Oh my gosh. And the part where the unicorn gives up and she just starts going with, oh my.
I feel like that was an animated movie that was billed as a child's movie because at the time it was
Mhm.
animated and cartoons were for kids.
Yeah.
But that was not for children. And I have, to be honest, I've not been brave enough to watch it as an adult.
Oh, it's so good. You have to go back to it.
I know,
It's
I
so
know. It's
good.
I know it's gonna hurt. I know I'm gonna identify with her. I know I'm gonna feel all the feelings, and I'm not really
Yeah.
sure I want to do
There are many feelings to be felt
right,
in the last
right.
unicorn.
Again, like I think the
Yeah,
difference between seeing it when you're 10 years old and being like unicorns, magic, and then like
right.
seeing it when you're 45 and like, oh God, regret and
I
femininity and
know.
patriarchy and it's
Right,
heavy,
like the
heavy.
relentless passage of time, you know.
I know. I
It's
lost all
yeah.
my friends. No, it's terrible. So let's get into this. Witch Blood Rising, awaken your magic in the modern world, right?
Yes.
This is a very cool concept because there is a lot of how to do this spell, how to
Mhm.
do that type of magic. And what we don't really talk about is what does daily life look like as a
Mhm.
modern witch? We see it a little bit. There are a handful of books out there that deal with this topic. I myself write a lot about like how do we do magic every day through kitchen witchcraft, right? Let's make it
Mhm.
easy.
Right.
Let's make it every day. First of all, what do you mean by awaken your magic in a modern world?
Oh gosh, yeah. Um, so from my one thing that I have learned throughout just my years and years of practicing witchcraft, learning about modern witchcraft, historical witchcraft, taking breaks from witchcraft, coming back to it, right? Is that witchcraft really is everywhere. It is
Mm,
everywhere you look, even if you don't recognize it, you know? Um, I think I think witches in pop culture are having a moment. So it's at this particular moment, it's very easy for me to come up with examples, right? Like the show like Agatha All Along just aired on Marvel. It was so
it was
good.
so good.
It was
Seriously,
such a good show. Yeah.
if you have not seen
Jack
it, people, if
Schaefer.
you're listening to watching this, go as soon as you're done with this episode, go watch Agatha.
Yes. Binge it, like make
Phenomenal.
some popcorn and binge it because it is
Yes.
exquisite.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean Catherine Hahn is amazing. Aubrey Plaza. They're all amazing.
Patty
Um,
LuPone.
Patty LuPone.
She blew my mind. I cried so
Yeah, no spoilers.
hard. No spoilers. The Patty LuPone episode broke my heart into a million
Yes.
pieces and it was beautiful.
She's so good. Yeah. Yeah, so they're all great. And Jack Schaefer, the showrunner, she took such care with the subject matter, right? So as I was watching the show, I was able to identify like, oh, like that's real. Like
Yeah.
that's real witchcraft and that and that and that. Not just the fact that like, oh, they're actually using tarot cards, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we know that witches read tarot. But, ask like, ideas of like again, I won't give any spoilers, but like, like who is the original Green Witch, right? What is the heart of Green Witchcraft? Like I was amazed that that made it into a mainstream Marvel show on Disney, that these ideas, right?
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
wrote about this for Reactor, like just like all the stuff that show got right.
Yeah.
So going back to like awakening your magic in a modern world, right? Witchcraft it hides in all of these unexpected places. Um, and you can find it and you can utilize it wherever it's hiding. Way back when the craft came out, of course the girls are like they're standing on the beach and they're invoking the quarters, right? And they give this beautiful, beautiful invocation like hail to the guardians of the watchtowers of the West. And as a teenager, I loved that, that really spoke to me. And I used that in my own rituals. But I always worried, like, is it stupid that I'm using a line from a movie in a religious thing? Am I allowed to do that? I don't know. But one thing I've learned kind of throughout the years is that there's this like feedback loop
Mm.
between witchcraft and pop culture, right? Where there will be this witchy thing kind of brewing, like a beautiful invocation, a beautiful like piece of liturgy that someone actually wrote, in order to be sacred. And then that will filter over to pop culture. Maybe it'll change a little bit, maybe it'll kind of be unchanged. And then people who see the pop culture version of it will respond to it and it'll start filtering back over to like this sacred space.
Hmm.
Um, and so witchcraft is just everywhere. And like whenever you see something that you can use, whether it's in a book in a bookshop or a Marvel show, like you should use it. Like take it and
Yeah.
use it, right?
I mean, I would argue that
Mhm,
everything's made up and the points don't matter. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, even if something is written from every religious text, right? Whether we're talking biblical or
mhm.
witchcraft, every religious text is just written by a person, just
Yes.
written by a person who is either trying to make a point,
Hmm.
guide you in a practice, uh, tell a story. So I
Yeah.
don't think there is any shame in saying, I'm inspired by this movie, television show, poem,
Mhm,
text, whether it is historically accurate or not, if it inspires you and touches a part of your heart, I don't think
mhm.
there's any shame in that or anything wrong with that, right? Yeah, use
Right.
it, do it.
I
Just,
mean, I think people have been doing this all along.
yeah,
We think of like religious texts like like I'll go for the big one, like the Bible,
yeah,
right? We think of them as like, well, they just even if we don't think that they just appeared out of nowhere, we think like, oh, well, the people writing them, they just took one unified source and it was pure and undiluted. But I bet folklore and whatever pop culture looked like, at that time there was still this conversation going on, right? Like things were
yeah.
still being influenced by each other, even way
Well,
back then.
yeah, and I also think that stories and please don't at me, don't write me letters about this, but like this is just my opinion. Even religious texts that are considered sacred. They're
Hmm.
considered sacred because people believe in them, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So much of these things, and this is, I grew up in a very Catholic home, going to church, listening to gospel readings, and all of these readings are stories. They're effing stories, right? There's stories that are meant to teach you something, to
Hmm.
inspire you to do something, act a certain way, don't be an asshole. Whatever the situation is, they're meant to inspire you, and that is relative to the time, culture, and society that those things are based in, right? So,
Right. Yeah.
not to oversimplify, okay, to oversimplify a little bit, we can look at things like pop culture shows.
Hmm.
We're talking about Marvel, right? Like these are these are stories that are meant to entertain, and if we take them a layer further, they're
Hmm.
meant to inspire, right? Good
Right.
versus evil,
Exactly.
right versus wrong. Who do you want to be? Which side of this conflict do you want to be on? How do
Hmm.
you, um, you know, differentiate yourself? Which do you believe in? And now I'm totally distracted because on the video, your kitties are grooming themselves, grooming
Yes.
each other, and it's the cutest
Yeah,
damn
I
thing I've ever
love
seen.
that over there. Yeah.
It's the best thing. I was just so like passionately making a point, and now I'm like, look, kitties. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's
Yeah.
allegory.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So one of my chapters in the book is about Loki, who is my favorite Marvel character,
Yeah,
and one of my favorite deities from mythology. I mean, Loki is so cool, right?
yeah.
Um, this is going to be a spoiler for the Loki show, but it's been a long enough time that I think it's okay. So if anyone doesn't want a spoiler, hold your hands over your ears and say la
Right.
la la for a minute. But in the very last episode of Loki, Loki, he starts off as this like super villain, right? But then he has this redemption arc, and he ends up sitting in the middle of Yggdrasil, the world tree from Norse mythology, physically holding the multiverse together, right? And that image, I mean, it was a powerful image. It was a really well done episode and really powerful ending. But what struck me as a witch, and as someone who loves mythology, was just how, like, what a sacred image that was, right? Like the universe is held together by a trickster god. I mean, that's so cool, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and it's this way in which like pop culture can tap into really, really kind of profound ideas, about like what is sacred and what is holy and like what's holding the universe together, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
this is
And
an
how,
example of just
yeah.
how a TV show got us something really, really amazing.
Yeah. And that is like your definition of the modern world and seeing the witchcraft everywhere. Just
Right.
like you had mentioned early on in this conversation about living in a manicured environment of Orange County and yet
Yeah,
being able to spot the wildness,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So we're here going along our daily lives, looking at the horrible news, hopefully not too much, going to work, eating meals, doing hobbies, reading books. And then when we stop and observe,
Yeah.
the messages and the stories of witchcraft are all around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Like witchcraft, it's been persecuted for so many centuries, right? It's like people have tried to stamp it out. And witchcraft, like it just won't die, right? It's not going anywhere. It keeps bubbling up because it responds to something that like we just really need as human beings, right? The ritual, the feralness, the wildness, the magic, the enchantment. Like we need that. And so witchcraft keeps appearing to give it to us.
And to teach us that being authentic and powerful,
Mhm.
especially as women,
Yeah. Women,
is,
queer people, anyone who is
yeah,
on the margins.
yeah, who's othered, right?
Hmm.
If you are on the fringes,
Hmm.
that this is your space. These are your people. Because
Yeah.
we're all othered. We're all fucking weird, you
Right.
know? We're all
Yeah.
fucking weird. We're all a mess. We're all lost, right? And we're all
Right.
traveling separately together,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Right.
so why this particular book for you right now? Like what's the timing? What, because this is coming
Sure.
out right, it's available as this episode is airing, your book is available March 2025. So
Yes. Yes.
people can buy it right now. So why is this important for you? Why was this project important for you now in your life?
Right. Yeah. Well, so this project, it evolved so slowly that it took me years to even realize it was what I was doing.
Mm.
Like I think I wrote one, excuse me, I wrote one article about what was the first chapter that I wrote? I think it was about gardening, right?
Yeah.
So discovering like California native plants, right? All of the plants that are unique to this particular climate, in this particular region, but have been like stamped out in favor of imports, right? Like palm trees, lawns. Um, and just what that taught me about, gosh, about belonging, about
Mhm.
keeping something safe for future generations. Like the chapter is called "We Can All Be Arcs," and it's based off something one of my gardening teachers said, which is that like if you nurture these native plants in your yard, then your yard can be an ark, like Noah's Ark, right? Because what you're doing is you're preserving these species and these ecosystems for future generations, and that like really spoke to me. And so I just kind of like over the years, I was just writing kind of essay after essay about, yeah, about, sacred datura and bee priestesses and tarot cards and the rainy season in California, um, about the devil's mark, right? This idea that like witches are marked by the devil. It's from the Malefic Maleficarum. I don't think I pronounced that right. And I was born with a giant birthmark on my arm. And so just
Yeah.
kind of like musings on how interesting that I was born with this big mark and I became a witch. And over time, I realized, oh, this is actually kind of starting to be a book, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and what made me decide to really kind of formalize it and organize it into an actual book, um, I guess you could say I wanted to write the book that like someone like me would want to read, you know?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said for guidebooks in witchcraft, right? Books of spells and exercises, like you know how to
How
be
to, yeah.
like those are so important, you know, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that they're out there. But I also wish there were more books of just that you could just curl up with and enjoy, right? And just get lost in some stories, you know, like I wish there were more books for witches who are bookworms like me.
Yes.
You know, like I
Agree.
just want to get lost in a good yarn, you know?
Yeah.
So I wrote this book in the hopes that like maybe it would fill that gap, right? Where you're not necessarily looking for exercises, although I do have some meditations in this book. Um, it's more that like you're just looking for those stories, right? You're looking to be inspired. You're looking to learn interesting things about interesting subjects. Um, but it's just something that you know, that you can just take pleasure in reading for its own sake.
I think that's
That was my
so
hope.
important. I think that, and I think you've achieved that. It really is important. I love that you said, wish there were more witchcraft books for bookworms.
Mhm,
Um, I could not agree more. There's a lot of witchcraft books out there that are incredible,
mhm.
but they read like stereo instructions. And you're like, there's a lot of information in here, but I just can't read this. So then it
They're
becomes
just not designed to be just read cover to
yeah,
cover. You
they're
know, this is not what they're
textbooks.
for. Yeah,
They're textbooks. And so you go to them for reference and you go to them for teaching and you teach yourself through this a step A, B, and C, but there's no getting inspired. There's no spark of creativity,
mhm,
like you said, the storytelling. And I love to learn through allegory. So,
yeah,
to look at a movie or read a book or watch a show and go, huh, how does that apply to me? Who am I in this story? As
sure.
witches,
Yeah.
we always see ourselves, or when we see ourselves, or in the past, we're the bad guy, right? So
Right. Yeah.
right, to have something like that to go, oh, look at all the beauty around us. Look at how we find,
Mhm.
wildness. Look at how we find magic. I think that's a really beautiful and unique take on witchcraft. And I think it's what the community needs. So thank you for that.
Oh gosh, I hope so. Yeah. I hope, you know, my favorite kind of book, I didn't make up this example. I think I heard like a literary agent say it, but it really spoke to me. My favorite kind of book is the one that will like make me miss my bus stop, right?
Yeah.
Like the kind that I get so lost in and just so swept up in that I look up and I'm like, oh no, you know, like
Yes.
I got to get off this bus, right?
Yes.
So that's the book that I hope that I wrote is something that people can just get pleasantly sucked into.
I love it so much. Was there something in the process of writing this book and creating this?
Mhm.
Was there something that really surprised you
Mhm.
about yourself or your process while doing this?
Yeah, well, so one thing that I worried about when I first submitted the manuscript to Wiser, my publisher, um, was that my worry was that it was actually two different books because
Mm,
some of the chapters are about pop culture, right? So you know, The Craft, Yellow Jackets, Loki, you know, all these movies and shows that I love. And then there were other chapters about nature, right? So a local bee, like honeybee colony. I think I mentioned Datura, the sea caves where I go sometimes, you know. And I worried like, oh, is this gonna, you know, are they gonna say that this is two different books?
yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I was really gratified to find that there were these through lines, you know, through subject matter that on the surface seemed like it wasn't connected, right? And again, it's all about this idea of finding the weeds, right? Finding the unexpected stuff. You know, if you're walking along the sidewalk, one of my favorite things to find when I'm taking a walk is datura, also known as like thornapple, Jimson weed, right? She's this one of the premier witching herbs, right? And she's a sacred herb both in Europe and in North America, where you know she's indigenous to. Um, And I love finding Datura because it's always this moment where I find some witchcraft growing by the side of the road, you know? And to a lot of people, Datura is just a weed, you know, like, oh, it's that poisonous plant. I got to rip it out. You know, they don't like it, like they don't want it there. So when you do see Datura growing, it means either someone recognizes her for the gift that she is, right? And the rightful resident of this land that she is, and they're cultivating her, or it means that she's survived, right? That she has popped up, she's claimed her space, and she's surviving, you know?
Oh, I love that
And
so much. I love that so much. I was just having another conversation with a gentleman who uh his specialty is toxic plants and
oh,
poisonous plants. And
okay, yeah.
his whole theory is you have to get to know the personality of
Mhm.
that plant. And that's so far, like I'm a kitchen witch. That's so far out of my realm. If you can't eat it, I don't work with it. You know what I mean? Like it's not,
Right. Well,
you
you can
know,
eat anything once,
I
as they
what, right?
say.
Once. But
Right.
so for you to say there's this magical herb, this sacred
Mhm.
datura that this is what she means, that she survived. And how do
Right.
we
Yeah.
identify with that? How do you identify? You know? And it reminds you sacred is around me all the time.
Right. Yeah. Datura is, the plant pops up by the side of the road. Genuine poetry pops up in a teen horror movie, right? Like witchcraft, like it keeps popping up
Yeah.
everywhere. That's what I love about it, you know?
Why do you think that is?
Oh gosh. I mean,
And so it's such a huge question, but like, why?
right,
Why does it
right.
keep showing up?
I mean, like I said, I think it's because that we have a need for it, you know? I mean, like meaning is always it's always this two-way street, right? Like there's the datura by the side of the road, but it's nothing unless I can imbue that plant with the meaning that it has for me, right? So it's always this two-way street. Um, so it's because we need that meaning in our lives that we
Mm.
find it, that we recognize it where it's popping up. Um, but then, of course, that opens up the deeper question of like, why do we need this meaning? You know,
Hmm.
like, why are we not happy just being total conformists, right? Like, why? I don't know. These are big questions,
These are huge
you
questions, right?
know?
Why do we need magic? Why do we need
Right.
wonder? Why do we need wildness and authenticity? I don't know if there's a one size fits all answer to that question. I think witchcraft pops up everywhere because we need it to, and we are the witches and we see it. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
people
Just like
who,
I think people with other mindsets, they're seeing patterns that we don't see, you know?
right, they're
Yeah.
seeing signs from angels, or, it's like
Yeah.
when I also think there's a vibrational, raising your vibrational frequency kind of energy, right? The example that I've heard many times is if you decide to buy a blue Toyota,
Uh-huh.
everywhere you look, you're going to see blue Toyotas.
Of course. Right. Yeah.
Right, because it's what's on your mind. You're now attuned to that. You're more likely to see it in your daily life. So if we are attuned as witches to magic, you and I are going to watch Agatha all along, or you and I are going to go see Wicked, and we're going to get something out of it that's so different than
Right.
someone who is not attuned to the magic that's there.
Right, exactly. In my previous book, The Witch's Kin, I write about animism, right? The idea that like everything is ensouled,
Yeah,
everything is sacred, everything is
yeah,
alive, even if it's not alive in the same way that we are, right?
yeah.
And one fascinating thing that I learned when I was doing research for that was that animism is actually like a cognitive process. Like it doesn't come out of nowhere. I'm trying to reconstruct what I myself wrote, you know. But I believe it comes from like mirror neurons, right? So like
Yep.
if you yawn or laugh, then I'm going to feel the urge to yawn or laugh. Those are the mirror neurons, and they work even with let's say like a tree that has a bark that like has a section of bark that maybe kind of looks like a face. Our mirror neurons are going to pick that up as a face in the tree, and we're going to perceive that tree as alive, or at least having some kind of living face in it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a thing that our brains actually do. Um, and I think we tend to think like, oh, well, that's we don't need our brains to do that. So we should like kind of like tamp down on that. We should like that's just like an accident of evolution. It's not serving us anymore. We should move beyond that. But what if that's wrong? What if it is very valuable for us to see other things as alive? Like
Absolutely.
what if there's a very good reason why we keep having this urge from childhood all the way through adulthood, to see our toys as alive, to see the trees as having consciousness, to see our house as alive, whatever, what if it's serving like a really important purpose?
I think that, wow, there's so much to unpack there. I do practice some animism, not as much as I would like to. And when I say that, it's because most of it for me is not conscious, right? I'm
Sure.
not thinking about it. I have named my home and she's amazing and we have conversations, but I don't think about it as
Hmm.
animism. It just is. I can
Right.
feel her energy. I recognize, the individuality of my home or the
Yeah.
tools I'm working with or the trees outside. We have a whole conversation. I have these two giant apple trees in my backyard. One of
Yeah.
them I call the grandmother tree, and one of them is the mother tree. And
Hmm.
both of them are very, 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 very old and very, very sick. And I talk to them all the time, and I
Yeah.
tell them they can stay as long as they want to. And
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
right. I think as children, it's not imagination. I think
Hmm.
we see that. I think it's that vibrational understanding. We're resonating at the same frequencies. And as we get older, we're taught to unsee it,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
right? But as witches, we go, oh no, wait a minute. I remember. And so I'm going to open that back up again. Whether or
Right.
not our brains need it. Who said that? Who says our brains don't need mirror neurons? That's how we communicate with other people. That's how we can sense when other people are like, when you walk into a room and somebody's just giving bad juju, you know that from that
Right.
phenomenon, right? We're reading energy all the time.
Hmm.
That's our gift as witches to be able to be more in tune with it,
Hmm. Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I have like a bunch of questions written here and I'm trying to go like, what did we already cover?
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah.
I mean, I think what you've done with this book is really important, right?
Thank you.
I really do. And I think the merging of the pop culture
Mhm.
with the animism and with the magic is important because that's how a lot of us see the world. And sometimes I think, oh, I'm looking too much into the thing. It's just a TV show,
Yeah.
but that's not the case, right? Like you said,
There's
magic
stuff
is
there.
it's everywhere. It's
Right.
everywhere. What do you hope people take away from reading this book?
Oh gosh. Kind of like when I think about like, when I imagine someone reading my book, which is like a surreal thing to imagine, even though it's not even my first book. Um, Kind of what I hope is that someone will read it and think to themselves like, "Oh, I thought I was the only one, but I'm not, you know? Because for me as a reader, like those are some of the most gratifying moments, whether I'm reading a book or a blog post or whatever,
Yeah.
where I think to myself, like, I thought it was just me, but no, I'm not alone. Like, I'm actually part of something bigger and I didn't even know it? So that's what I hope readers get out of this is that their stories, their experiences, even the ones, or maybe even especially the ones that they feel like they can't share for whatever reason, are like they're not just valid, but they're actually very common. They're actually universal.
I
That's
think
what
you've done a great job with that.
I
I really do. I really do. And like you said, like you can get lost in it and you can feel belonging. And I think that's what we all feel like. And I think going back to the beginning of the conversation, when we find the path of witchcraft, it's because we didn't feel like we belonged somewhere else,
Yes. Right.
right?
Yeah. We're wearing
So
that itchy sweater. We gotta get it off, you
it's
know?
the best analogy I've ever heard, like the too tight, itchy sweater. And it's exactly what it felt like for me being in church as a kid. Like,
Oh, right.
it
Yeah.
doesn't, can't get it off of me, you know?
Yeah, right. Or
I,
even that it's like trying to be into the same things that other kids were into, right? Like it doesn't fit. It doesn't feel right.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I 100% agree. And the book is fantastic. Witch Blood Rising, Awakening Your Magic in a Modern World. I'm trying to read my own handwriting, so I apologize. So, awesome, Asa. Tell us where we can find you online, where we can buy this book, how we get more information on you.
Sure, yeah. Well, so the book, I believe, is available wherever books are sold. Um, go to your local indie, support your local bookstore, bookshop.org is a great resource, but also, I mean, it's, Barnes& and Noble, Amazon, I won't judge.
Yeah,
You know.
just buy the
Or you
book.
can buy it straight from the publisher too.
Yeah.
You can find me online. asawestauthor.com is my website. I'm on Instagram, Blue Sky, and a Linktree as the Red Tail Witch. I love red-tailed hawks and I love
Yes.
foxes, so the red tail.
I love it so much. And we'll put all of those links and notes on the show notes so people can just go and click and buy the book and follow you online. Okay. Awesome, Asa. Here's the last question of the day. And I ask
All
this
right.
to everybody. So if you've been listening to the show, you know this question is coming. If you could have me as a kitchen witch cook you
Mhm.
one magical meal, what would it be and why?
Gosh. Okay. So last year I took up running to just try to get in shape. And my current goal is a 9-minute mile, and I haven't quite hit it yet. So if you could cook me something, I would love a big, nourishing bowl of something that would like get me to 9 minutes.
I don't know what to cook for a runner's body. That's interesting.
Well,
Uh,
hold on. I don't know if I have a runner's body quite yet. Let's be abundantly clear.
something super nourishing, something with really good complex carbohydrates, something delicious. I probably would make you like a giant veggie bowl with like
Mm.
black beans and maybe ground turkey and like fried sweet potatoes. Like I feel like sweet
Oh,
potatoes
okay.
are really good, yummy carb. And sweet potatoes are all about love, and beans are all about prosperity. I don't know any
Right.
foods that are gonna make you go fast. But I would make a veggie bowl because then I would put in like um I would do like onions for banishing negativity. So you would believe in yourself. I would give
Okay.
you, I would give you zucchini or summer squash in there because that's going to give you tenacity to finish the
I love
job.
it.
Right. So like all those kind of elements to kind of get you through specifically the 26 miles that you'd have to go energetically, needing that stick to itness is what you're going to get from things like summer squash and zucchini squash. But I would grill everything up and put it all in a bowl with
Uh-huh.
sweet potatoes. And so, I don't know. I'm hungry now. So,
I love it. Me too. I love it. That sounds delicious. That sounds amazing.
Asa West, you're delightful. I had the best time talking witchcraft and pop culture with you. I'm 100% going to go watch Agatha all along.
Yes.
And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. This was such a delight. Yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you.
You are so, so, so welcome. And until next time, everyone, I wish you all the blessings and so much gratitude.